Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Jauan Jennings, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, talking about my Week 12 wide receiver rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season, going over my top 36 wide receivers. So if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available there. While you're down in the description, if you have not yet already, of course, subscribe to the channel, as I'm making daily fantasy football content in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. And of course, later today, live streaming between 6 to 7 p.m. PST. So if you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and begin by talking about wide receivers in regards to matchups based on receiving statistics allowed by each individual defense from weeks 5 through 11, because the most recent 6 to 7 games by each individual defense is far more indicative as to what we can potentially expect to see going into this week. And even though we aren't able to take advantage of the potential Washington Commanders matchup, as they are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers since week 5, the 49ers, Steelers, Buccaneers, Raiders, Bears, Lions, etc. can certainly be taken advantage of. I wanted to go ahead and represent some of these statistics because I will be referencing back to them over the course of today's episode, because the efforts of the defenders that our wide receivers are taking on is certainly going to play an impact as to the potential success and or failures our wide receivers find within the given week. So therefore, I want to also represent some of the more disadvantageous matchups, such as the Cincinnati Bengals, Texans, Broncos, Browns, Chargers. Now, even though your wide receiver may have technically a difficult matchup, it doesn't mean that it's impossible to score. We'll talk about Stefon Diggs and the fact that he has seen far more slot utilization and how that's going to help him find success this week against the Bengals. And despite the fact that it is the number 32 ranked matchup, he is still going to find his own semblance of success. With this all covered, quick reminder again, like I mentioned before, subscribe to the channel if you guys have not yet already. By subscribing today, not only do you get an edge upon your league mates for the remainder of the season, but you help me get one step closer to achieving my goal this season of surpassing 100,000 subscribers. Be a friend, tell a friend. Thank you very much for all the support. The final thing I wanted to mention for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings, besides, of course, my top 36 wide receivers that we're going to present on today's episode, if you want to go ahead and get those rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season, travel down to the description and check out Betr. I'm partnering with them for the entirety of the season, not only to provide plays, but of course, Sunday morning rankings. When you sign up using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of 10 and make a first time play within a real cash play, you'll be eligible to get my rankings sent from my email directly to yours. All positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, flex, for both half and full PPR. So if you're interested, take advantage of this opportunity. As of today, we do have a couple plays that we're interested in, but for those of you who sign up today using code Andrew, you'll get a free pick of Cooper Flag going more than 0.5 points and assists, and additionally, you get a free $10. But besides that, in regards to the plays that we're making today, yesterday's plays hit in regards to the NBA, that being Desmond Bane and of course Draymond Green. But today we have Harkenstein, we have Quickly, and we have Mobley on these 3 plays in order to get a 3.5x multiplier. So for those of you who are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. By signing up today using code Andrew, again, do not forget you get a free $10. So take advantage of the opportunity. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, let's go ahead and begin my top 36 wide receiver conversation with Jaxon Smith-Njigba. It's no question that JSN is one of the most consistent wide receivers in fantasy football. In 7 of the last 10 games, he has had a minimum of 8 receptions and a minimum of 100 receiving yards. My only genuine concern regarding JSN this week is in the event in which they are taking on the Tennessee Titans, they blow out this defense so badly that in the second half, they stop throwing the football. We have seen it happen already thus far this season, and that is my only genuine concern. Outside of that, the Tennessee Titans are the 8th best matchup at the wide receiver position, allowing over 28 fantasy points per game in this overall category. And considering the lack of utilization we have seen from Cooper Kupp and effectively Rashee Rice as of late, and the injury that Torrey Horton has been held out with, it leads to Jaxon Smith-Njigba getting even more opportunity and workload. We have seen other wide receivers such as Nico Collins recently, 9 catches, 92 and a touchdown. Quentin Johnston, 53 and a touchdown. Michael Pittman, 8 for 95 and a touchdown. Kayshon Boutte, 55 and a touchdown. Many of wide receivers on the outside have found success against the Tennessee Titans. JSN would be next. Hopefully he's able to do enough damage early in the game, to which regardless of the score in the second half, he is still going to be incredibly relevant for fantasy purposes. Number 2, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown taking on the New York Giants. I understand that he's coming off of an incredibly underwhelming game of 12 targets and 2 receptions, but this is the first time in Amon-Ra St. Brown's NFL career in which he has had 10 or more targets and less than 6 receptions total. Again, this is a game in which we're going to just completely move on from. This is an anomaly situation, and going forward, I would anticipate a very healthy volume of opportunity, as we have seen in the last 2 games without Sam Laporta in the lineup. Week 11 of this season and Week 11 of the 2024 season, Amon-Ra St. Brown in those games, 12 and 11 targets. That's the kind of opportunity share we should anticipate to see for the remainder of the season. And now that they're taking on the 11th best matchup at the position, the Giants allowing over 27 fantasy points per game. We've talked about ad nauseum the fact that this secondary and defense runs a lot of man coverage and they get burnt a lot. Jauan Jennings, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, all incredibly relevant in the last 3 games. We should continue to see, of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown in the thumbnail of today's episode. Jameson Williams both find success in the matchup. Puka Nacua is our number 3. Look, his snap share as of late has decreased drastically, playing 52% and 67% in the last 2 games. But despite this overall dip in terms of his overall snap share, he still has a very healthy target rate, being targeted on 32% of the routes that he is running thus far this season. Now, the primary reason why his snap share has decreased is because the Los Angeles Rams want to run the football, and they have 4 tight ends to do so. So because of the tight end frequency of the rotation getting into the mix, running 3 tight end sets, Puka Nacua has to step off the field. But genuinely, this is actually a positive for those of us who have Puka Nacua on roster. As long as Puka Nacua doesn't have to be out there blocking every single play or running a route every single play, it's going to keep him healthy for the remainder of the year. And that's what we want as we are on our way to the fantasy playoffs in order to capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. Now, in regards to his potential this week, taking on the Buccaneers is the 3rd easiest wide receiver matchup, 32.58 fantasy points per game. We have seen wide receivers like Shavers last week, 90 and a touchdown. Hollins, 106 against this defense. Diggs in the same game, 46 and a touchdown. Rashee Rice, 9 catches for 77, while also Chris Olave balled out against his secondary. There's many of wide receivers that have found success against Tampa Bay. Puka Nacua, Davante Adams should be next. Number 4, we have Nico Collins, who plays on Thursday night against the Buffalo Bills. And I understand that the matchup as a whole against the Buffalo Bills is not the most advantageous, but primarily because of the efforts of Davis Mills, I do find confidence in Nico Collins. Because over the course of the last 2 games in which Davis Mills has started, Nico Collins has put up 19 plus fantasy points and a half PPR in both games, totaling 25 total targets. With Davis Mills starting on Thursday with CJ Stroud still in the concussion protocol, whether this is a positive or negative game script for this offense or even a neutral game script, I would anticipate Nico Collins to continue to get his healthy volume of opportunity share. As we have seen wide receivers like Waddle, 84 and a touchdown, Rice for 80 yards, Tetairoa, 7 for 99, London, 158 and a touchdown. Many of wide receivers finding success, and as long as Davis Mills continues to look in the direction of Nico Collins as the number 1, which he will, he's going to find success for another consecutive week. Number 5, we have Rashee Rice, who's coming off of 3 of the last 4 games with 9 targets minimum. And the reason why he's able to get such a high volume of targets and receptions is effectively because of the average depth of target. 3 of his first 4 games this season have had an average depth of target of less than 6 yards. That's primarily because 11 of his receptions have been behind the line of scrimmage and 9 other receptions have been between 1 to 10 yards. That's 20 of his total 26 receptions, 77% between 1 to 10 yards or behind the line of scrimmage. Again, the opportunities there are far easier for Rashee Rice to get receptions, and taking on a defense like the Colts that can certainly be taken advantage of. I mean, we have seen, again, them give up nearly 25 fantasy points per game on average since week 5, and they're only about 3 fantasy points per game away from being a top 10 matchup at the wide receiver position. So again, it's very much so a slippery slope in which if Rashee Rice gets on fire early, is able to make the receptions and get the red zone utilization, could very easily have a game very reminiscent to other wide receivers that we have seen dominate from the slot position of late. Drake London, 104 and a touchdown. Keenan Allen, 11 for 119 and a touchdown in that same game. Ladd McConkey, 9 receptions for 67. And Shamir DK, 7 for 93. All this done against Indianapolis as of late. Rashee Rice should find himself a lot of success this week. Number 6, we have Emeka Egbuka, who is coming off of the last 4 games of 43 total targets. That is elite target opportunity. He has been top 8 at the overall conversation of total targets over the course of the last 5 weeks. In one of those weeks, he was out on bye. So that kind of puts into perspective just how much of an elite opportunity share he's continuing to see. And considering this game is being implicated to be the highest scoring game of the week between the Rams and Tampa Bay Buccaneers with a 49.5 point total, the assumption is that Emeka Egbuka in a negative game script should be seeing a lot of target opportunity within this game, taking on the 18th best matchup at the position, who most recently allowed 9 catches and 105 to JSN, 6 for 71 in a touchdown to Jauan Jennings, 8 for 101 in a touchdown against Travis Hunter. Many of wide receivers finding success, and hopefully Emeka Egbuka can follow in their footsteps with a great target opportunity, hopefully finding a little bit more success with the opportunity that he is being granted. Number 7 is Davante Adams. On the other side of this matchup, we have Davante Adams taking on the third best wide receiver matchup, nearly allowing 33 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. I mentioned it earlier with Puka Nacua. Puka's been off the field a lot as of late, and because of that, it leads to even more target opportunity for Davante Adams. But the reality of the situation is Davante Adams' overall contributions on a weekly basis revolve around touchdowns. If he scores a touchdown, he's relevant. And even in this most recent game against the Seattle Seahawks, where he comes away with 1 reception and 1 receiving yard, he scores a touchdown. Even in his worst game of the season, finds a way to find the end zone. 4 consecutive games with 1 touchdown minimum, leading the entire NFL in terms of red zone targets and red zone receiving touchdowns. As long as that continues to be the case, of course, he is an automatic start every single week. Number 8, we have CeeDee Lamb. Look, in this most recent game, could have easily had himself a second touchdown with, 4th and 2, 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, easily wide open, drops a touchdown, could have ended up scoring 20 plus fantasy points, but we'll take what we got. 15 plus points and a half PPR is going to suffice. But in the case of this upcoming matchup, I am a little bit scared of this Eagles secondary and defense, as they have been absolutely locking down teams like the Green Bay Packers and most recently the Lions. And even though earlier this season in week 1, CeeDee Lamb came away with 7 grabs and 110 yards against this Philadelphia defense, they have been far more improved as of late. Now, that being said, in 2 of the last 4 games, they have given up 88 yards and a touchdown to Jameson Williams and 9 catches for 128 to Jordan Addison. But number 1 wide receivers, primarily like an Amon-Ra St. Brown or a Justin Jefferson, have been effectively locked down, which is my only concern with someone like CeeDee Lamb. Hopefully, he gets more slot utilization. But then again, if he's going to see Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, they have played incredibly well over the course of the last 2 weeks, which is going to make it a very tough matchup. But maybe a negative game script, which could rack up his overall numbers this week. Number 9, we have Tetairoa McMillan. Yes, this is probably the biggest jump in terms of rankings from one week to another. I did not anticipate for Tetairoa McMillan to get 12 targets, 8 catches, 130, and 2 touchdowns. I don't think anybody did. But the fact of the matter is, the slot utilization that they exposed him to this most recent week is hopefully going to give confidence in not only Bryce Young, but of course Dave Canales, to continue to scheme up Tetairoa McMillan in these aspects. Coming off of a week in which he scored 10.6 of his 29 fantasy points from the slot position. Again, when he's being lined up against linebackers and running routes in which he can find success, of course, he's going to be in a far more advantageous position for opportunity. And we all know that Bryce Young had loved throwing the ball to Adam Thielen in years past in terms of his favorite target being from the slot position. I think this opens up the offense and it opens up even more opportunity for Tetairoa McMillan, now taking on this week the number 1 wide receiver matchup, the 49ers, who are allowing 35.16 fantasy points per game to opposing receivers, who just recently allowed 15 receptions, 185 to Michael Wilson, 6 for 66 and a touchdown to Greg Dortch, and Puka Nacua, Davante Adams, 77 and a touchdown from each of them. Again, there is going to be a lot of success for Tetairoa this week, hopefully, if Bryce Young continues to look in his direction against the number 1 wide receiver matchup. Number 10, we have T. Higgins. Earlier today, we got a report that Joe Burrow practiced in full. Now, I don't know if that means that Joe Burrow is playing this week, but it certainly means that he is getting one step closer. But in regards to this week, in the absence of Ja'Marr Chase due to the suspension, it should lead to a target boost in the direction of T. Higgins, who has been great with Joe Flacco of late. And as long as this is going to be a negative game script that is guaranteed, the Patriots are a middle-of-the-pack matchup, and even though they have great cornerback play, they've given up their fair share of fantasy statistics to opposing receivers, such as Drake London, 118 and 3 touchdowns, Tez Johnson, 42 and 2 touchdowns, Egbuka, 115 and a touchdown. Even John Mechie scored a touchdown last week in a game in which Justin Fields couldn't do really much than run the ball. All in all, T. Higgins an auto start in the absence of Ja'Marr Chase. Number 11, we have the thumbnail of today's episode, Jameson Williams. Post-bye week, he has scored 14 plus fantasy points in 3 consecutive games. And because of the absence of Sam Laporta, now on the injured reserve, it is going to continue to lead to more opportunity. Over the course of the last 2 career games where Jameson Williams has played without Sam Laporta in the lineup, he has scored 17.7 and 20.6 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Now has the 11th best matchup at the position, taking on the Giants, who just got absolutely torched by not only Christian Watson last week for 2 touchdowns, Romeo Doubs for 86 yards and a touchdown the week before, and Jauan Jennings 41 yards and a touchdown the week before that. Many of wide receivers finding success, Jameson Williams against his secondary that is playing heavy man coverage should be able to cook deep down the field. Moving on to our number 12. We have Michael Wilson. Prior to the recording of this video, I did get confirmation that Marvin Harrison Jr. has been designated out for Week 12. And considering Michael Wilson is coming off of a game where he had the 3rd most targets, 2nd most receptions, and the most receiving yards by a single wide receiver this season in a single game, this is a game in which this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the 13th best matchup, in which we could see Michael Wilson dominate. We've recently seen Nico Collins go for 7 catches, 136 against the Jacksonville defense. I mean, we're talking about Jaden Higgins in the same game. 5 catches, 42 and a touchdown. Davante Adams, 35 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jaxon, 162 and a touchdown. In the event in which Jacoby Brissett comes out here and continues to, of course, throw the ball at an incredibly high clip, expect for Michael Wilson Jr. to be an auto start this week at a very high rate. Yes, top 12 should be expected considering the volume that should probably go in his direction this upcoming matchup, because quite frankly, you're going to have to worry about both Michael Wilson and additionally on top of it, someone like McBride tearing up that defense. Number 13, we have Romeo Doubs. Look, the reality of the situation is they're taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are the second best matchup at the position, allowing 33 fantasy points per game, allowing 63 in a touchdown to T. Higgins, 107 in a touchdown to Ladd McConkey, 115 to Michael Pittman Jr., and 115 to Alec Pierce in the same game. But what is incredibly important is that this season, in the 4 games in which, of course, Romeo Doubs has taken on teams that run heavy man coverage, Detroit, Baltimore, the New York Giants, and Washington Commanders, in those games is averaging 9 targets, 5.5 receptions, 90 receiving yards, and 0.75 receiving touchdowns per game for 16.25 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. Again, over the course of weeks 6 through 11, the Pittsburgh Steelers are playing 40% man coverage. There is a lot of potential for Romeo Doubs to continue to torch one-on-one man coverage. Expect him to have himself a feasting week up ahead. Number 14, we have Chris Olave, who's taking on the Atlanta Falcons coming off of the bye. Look, in his first game prior to the bye week, in which he had Rashid Shaheed no longer in the lineup, he had 8 targets, 5 catches, 104 and a touchdown for 18.9 fantasy points. But even though you may think 8 targets is not a lot, if you look at the game script in that most recent game against Carolina, they were up for majority of the game. I mean, Alvin Kamara ran the ball 22 times. I don't expect that to happen every single time out, which will effectively lead to more targets in the direction of Chris Olave, who's taking on the 9th easiest wide receiver matchup, allowing nearly 28 fantasy points per game, which is the Atlanta Falcons. Again, recently allowing 130 and 2 touchdowns to Tetairoa McMillan, 83 and a touchdown to Xavier Legette, 84 and a touchdown to Alec Pierce, Demario Douglas 100 yards and a touchdown, Stefon Diggs 38 and a touchdown. Everybody has found success, whether it's out wide or in the slot. We have seen, of course, Chris Olave dominate regardless of whether it's zone or man coverage, whether it's out wide or in the slot position, leads the wide receiver position of this organization. Anticipate for him to be a fantastic play for another week here. Number 15, we have Stefon Diggs, who in 6 of the last 8 games has had 10 or more fantasy points. And since week 4, he's the number 10 overall wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format, coming off of a game of 9 catches for 105 yards on Thursday Night Football against the Jets. Now, in this most recent week against the Jets, he ran 69% of his routes from the slot position. That is a season-high number, primarily because he had 6 receptions from the slot position for 60 yards. In the event in which we are taking on the Bengals, who of course have an incredible secondary, but primarily their outside corner play of DJ Turner has locked down many of wide receivers, as long as Kayshon Boutte or of course Matt Collins is going to pull that coverage and Stefon Diggs is functioning from the slot position, anticipate for him to find a lot of success within the upcoming week as the number 1 receiving option of this Drake May-led offense. Moving on to our number 16, we have George Pickens, who has been one of the most consistent wide receivers in fantasy football. Outside of week 1, has had 10 plus fantasy points and a half PPR every single game. And why that's so important is that in week 1, he took on the Philadelphia Eagles, who he will be taking on this week. In week 1 against the Eagles, 4 targets, 3 receptions, 30 yards, 4.5 fantasy points. Many of close touchdown calls and many of defensive pass interference calls because they couldn't cover George Pickens in that game. There's a reason why, of course, the Dallas Cowboys kept that game so competitive. And over the course of, weeks 2 through 11, since that game, we have seen George Pickens 68 plus receiving yards in 8 of the last 9 games, 5 or more receptions in 7 of the last 9 games. Even though this Eagles defense has been scary of late, and whether or not we do see Quinyon Mitchell coverage or Cooper DeJean, Adoree Jackson, it doesn't matter. I am anticipating for George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb to be aired out a lot of opportunities, and in those opportunities come away with a lot of fantasy points this week. Number 17, we have Michael Pittman Jr. Very similar to a George Pickens, has been incredibly consistent in fantasy. 7 of the last 10 games, 12 or more fantasy points in a half PPR. He is technically the number 12 overall wide receiver in fantasy points per game on average since week 1. And as long as he continues to be an auto star for us, I understand that it's a difficult matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, and that's why I have him at number 17 based on my projections. But we've recently seen this most recent week, this secondary give up their fair share of yards to guys like, Cortland Sutton, 4 for 59, Troy Franklin, 4 for 84, Pat Bryant's 5 for 82. Many of wide receivers have found success against this secondary, and in the event in which, of course, Daniel Jones, who has played incredibly well against teams that blitz, Again, the Kansas City Chiefs in the top 7 in terms of blitz rate this season. As long as we're going to be in a situation which Daniel Jones is getting blitzed for a majority of this game, he is going to cook that defense and look in the direction of Michael Pittman Jr. as his security blanket, as he has done week over week for the entirety of the season. Number 18, we have Justin Jefferson. Look, I understand that number 18 is a relatively low rank for the talent that Justin Jefferson is, but as long as we have to continue to wait for the cement to dry in the case of J.J. McCarthy, of course, we're going to have to be a little bit cautious with Justin Jefferson, because back-to-back weeks here, we've had very underwhelming performances from him. But in terms of the last 5 games, he is ranked as wide receiver 27, 44, 18, 26, and 25 in those individual games. He is only twice this season ranked in the top 12 weekly wide receiver rankings in a half PPR scoring format. That in itself gives me a little bit more comfortability in moving him into the number 18 spot, because as long as JJ McCarthy continues to play at the rate at which he is right now, with as many inaccurate passes that have gone in the direction of both Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and technically Jordan Addison, with all those inaccurate passes going in the direction of his top receiving options, Justin Jefferson technically in this current iteration of this offense is a lesser play. Then we move on to A.J. Brown, who very similar to Justin Jefferson hasn't been getting very many quality looks, but in this most recent game, season high of targets, 11, season high of receptions with 7. And will this keep up? That's the only question. Taking on the Dallas Cowboys, who are the 12th best matchup at the position, we'd like to hope that it could potentially keep up, as we have seen wide receivers like Marvin Harrison Jr. cook this secondary. Trey Tucker in garbage time this most recent week, 47 and a touchdown. Troy Franklin, 89 and 2 touchdowns. Wide receivers have found success against the secondary. And even though A.J. Brown back in week 1 against his defense went for 1 target, 1 catch, 8 yards, we're hoping for that not to be the case. And we're hoping for him to get the love that he requires in terms of the target opportunity to be fantasy relevant. And same thing with DeVonta Smith in the same overall vein. Back in week 1, 3 targets, 3 catches, 16 yards for 3.1 fantasy points against the Dallas Cowboys. They are a top 12 matchup. We've seen Marvin Harrison, Trey Tucker, Troy Franklin all find success. It's just purely a matter of, will DeVonta Smith get opportunity? Since week 7, he's had a 33% target share within this offense, which in my opinion is a great number for a wide receiver of his caliber. He just needs to see it at a far more consistent rate. There are games in which he pops off and there's games in which he disappears. Hopefully this week is a game in which he completely pops off and tears apart that Dallas Cowboys secondary. Number 21 is DK Metcalf. Look, Rodgers is dealing with a wrist injury on his non-throwing arm. Now, in the event in which we're going to be in a situation in which he misses, remember that last week when Mason Rudolph came into the game, he immediately targeted DK Metcalf 5 times. One of those was an offensive pass interference, but the opportunity was at an incredibly high rate with Mason Rudolph there in comparison to Aaron Rodgers. So hopefully going into this week, even if we do have Mason Rudolph under center, I am believing that against the Bears, the 6th best matchup at the position, allowing over 30 fantasy points per game on average to opposing wide receivers, with no other relevant wide receivers in this offense, in a matchup which they have given up 98 yards to Olave, 111 to Chase, 121 to Higgins, 89 to Darius Slayton, that Metcalf could very easily be in the mix for 90 plus yards and hopefully, the potential of a touchdown within this offense. 22 is Alec Pierce. Speaking of scoring touchdowns, my goodness, he has been great as of late. 3 of the last 4 games, 12 plus fantasy points. And over the course of those 3 games in which he has been hyper fantasy relevant, 30 total targets combined in those 3 games. Now has an opportunity of taking on Kansas City, which is a disadvantageous matchup as a whole. But like I mentioned earlier with Michael Pittman Jr., thus far this season, in games which we have seen Daniel Jones blitzed at a very high rate against teams like Miami, Pittsburgh, Denver, or Atlanta, he has found a lot of success in the passing category. Therefore, I would assume even against this Chiefs team that is in the top echelon in terms of blitz rate thus far this season, I'd assume that Daniel Jones can find his opportunities deep down the field in the direction of his primary threats, like an Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman, as they both have the opportunity to be relevant at a top 24 capacity this week in the matchup. In a negative game script, in fact. Moving on to our number 23, Zay Flowers. Look, he has had 74 plus receiving yards in 6 of the last 7 games with Lamar Jackson. As long as he continues to see that level of production, yes, he is not going to be touchdown relevant, but taking on a secondary like the New York Jets, who no longer have Michael Carter II or Sauce Gardner, should be a matchup we are looking to, of course, explore the potential of Zay Flowers within. Again, Diggs, 9 catches, 105. Judy, 78 and a touchdown. Jamar Chase, 91 yards. T. Higgins, 44 and a touchdown. There was a lot of potential for Zay Flowers to get his opportunity. And of course, once again, be top 24 relevant. If he scores a touchdown, would very easily jump into the top 15 conversation, if not top 12 this week. Moving on to our number 24. Very similar to Zay Flowers, we have Wan'Dale Robinson, who very much so is going to be dependent on yardage and receptions. Not very often is going to find the end zone. And over the course of the last 2 games in which he has played with Jaxson Dart, 11 targets per game and 9.15 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. Considering Jaxson Dart is progressing from the concussion protocol and is on pace to potentially play this week against Detroit in a negative game script against the number 7 wide receiver matchup, you would assume that Wan'Dale Robinson, in the absence of Darius Slayton, who did not practice today, who is dealing with a hamstring injury, should see himself a very healthy share of opportunity. As we have seen many of wide receivers like Tez Johnson, Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown all find very healthy volumes of opportunity and success against the defense. In my opinion, it's purely just a matter of as long as Jaxson Dart is active, he's a top 24 player. Moving on to our number 25, we have Christian Watson. Look, I mentioned this before, whether it was on Hidden Gems last week, whether it was the waiver wire pickups. The fact of the matter is, Christian Watson, in the absence of Josh Jacobs and Tucker Kraft this week, has himself a lot of red zone opportunity. And considering he is coming off of a game with a season-high target share and season-high first read share, that is going to lead me to believe that taking on the Minnesota Vikings, he can find a lot of success. As we have seen recently, Flowers for 75 yards, Amon-Ra 97, Jamo 66 in a tutty, Ladd 88 in a touchdown. Many wide receivers have found success against this Minnesota secondary. AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith, both went nuclear against them. It's just purely a matter of as long as Christian Watson continues to function as the number 1 red zone and receiving option of this offense, should be relevant at a top 25 capacity. Number 26. Yes, I had to rank Darnell Mooney this high because Drake London is out, and yes, Michael Penix is out, which doesn't feel too confident with the overall suggestion of a number 26 ranking for Darnell Mooney. But the reality of the situation is that I'm going to take the performance earlier this season against the Miami Dolphins without Drake London and with Kirk Cousins in the lineup, going for 4 targets, 1 catch, and 11 yards as a fluke performance. And going forward, I'm going to anticipate that Darnell Mooney is going to get himself a lot of opportunity that will lead to success, because the offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, earlier today said, and I quote, "At some point here, Mooney's going to get a high amount of targets and he'll start taking off. This is the week. You get him the opportunity he requires. Kirk Cousins needs to deliver the ball in his direction, and as long as they do so, a lot of success can be found, as we have seen many wide receivers find success against the secondary in New Orleans." Number 27, we have Jauan Jennings. Look, he's still servicing as the number 1 wide receiver of this offense, while Pearsall is still returning from his knee injury and, of course, trying to get reacclimated within this offense. But the reality of the situation is that Kittle and McCaffrey are still the number 1s per se of this offense. And as long as Purdy continues to play well and continues to feast, and they're taking on a team like the Carolina Panthers, who hopefully can take advantage of the fact that the 49ers defense is the number 1 wide receiver matchup, this could be a game in which it is a shootout. And if in fact that does end up taking place, yes, I have Jauan Jennings ranked at number 27 because I do expect an expansion within the role of Pearsall, but I still do believe he can be very much so relevant as a wide receiver 3 this week. Brian Thomas Jr. is my number 28. Under the assumption that Brian Thomas Jr. practices this week and is going to return from the ankle injury, I understand that playing a wide receiver coming off of the ankle sprain is not the smartest overall play, but as long as Will Johnson, the primary number 1 cornerback of the Arizona Cardinals, is going to miss a 3rd consecutive week here, I am willing to start Brian Thomas Jr. in that idea alone. In the absence of Will Johnson, the secondary is vulnerable. And if that's going to be the case, I would fire up Brian Thomas Jr. If, in fact, Will Johnson's active, I'm going to ignore Brian Thomas Jr., not even going to rank him in the top 40. That is the only contingency in which I would feel confident rolling him this week. Number 29 is Ricky Pearsall. Like I mentioned just moments ago with Jauan Jennings. As of right now, yes, Jennings is still servicing as the number 1 option, but Pearsall is going to gain momentum as the weeks progress, coming off of the knee injury, as he gets reacclimated within this offense. They're taking on Carolina, who is running the most zone coverage amongst all teams thus far this season. And of this offense, the zone killer is Ricky Pearsall. Over the course of the first 4 games of this season, he had 19 targets, 13 receptions, and 190 receiving yards against zone coverage. The last 3 zone killers that have taken on the Carolina Panthers, consisting of Doubs, Olave, and London. Doubs went for 91 yards, Olave 104 and a touchdown, London 119. I would assume that there's a possibility in which Ricky Pearsall, the zone coverage beater of this team, can find a lot of success and very easily outproduce not only Jennings, but this number 29 ranking. Tez Johnson's our number 30. Primarily here because this game is implicated of being the highest scoring game of the week with a 49.5 point total. So in the event in which we're going to have a high scoring game, you would assume that a wide receiver who has scored 4 receiving touchdowns for this offense in the last 5 games should be implicated for a very opportune week here against the LA Rams secondary, who have given up their fair share of stats. But the reality of the situation is we have to keep our eye on the status of Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin could be practicing, could be starting this week. If in fact that is the case, it could diminish the overall workload of Tez Johnson, because over the course of the last 2 games with Chris Godwin in the lineup, he had 14 targets in 2 games, which certainly within this offense would impact Tez Johnson's potential for upside. 31 is Romeo Doubs. Look, since the bye week, he is ranked as a top 36 wide receiver on a weekly basis in 4 of the last 6 games. So even though he has yet to score a touchdown throughout those last 6 games, he has still been hyper relevant in a top 36 capacity. I know many of you are disappointed with his overall performances, but the reality of the situation is he continues to see himself enough opportunity to still be relevant. And considering there's a potential in which Jacobs is out this week, Kraft is already out, Jaden Reed is still trying to work back from the IR, it presents a lot of opportunity for Romeo Doubs and of course Christian Watson to take over this offense. And as long as Jordan Love shows up and shows out, there's a potential in which he could very easily be a top 30 receiving option. Number 32, we have Khalil Shakir. In a game in which Josh Allen scores 6 touchdowns and Dalton Kincaid is out, and they score upwards of 40 points, you would assume that Khalil Shakir would be highly implicated, but he goes for 1 reception and -3 receiving yards. But these are one of the weeks that we're going to go ahead and just throw into the anomaly bin, and we're going to move on from it. Okay, so going into this week, we have a Thursday night quick game to find a redemption game against the Houston Texans. Again, the secondary of the Houston Texans is incredible. Players like Stingley, Lassiter out there on the cornerback position is certainly something that we want to avoid. But in the case of Khalil Shakir, who dominates the middle of the field, you would assume that in the absence of Petrie, their starting safety and nickel cornerback, there's a possibility in which Khalil Shakir should see himself a greater opportunity share in a very difficult matchup ahead on Thursday night. 33 is Greg Dortch. Like I mentioned earlier, Marvin Harrison's already been designated out. Considering we're coming off a week in which the quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, is coming off of 57 passing attempts, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 66 yards and a touchdown from Greg Dortch, there's a possibility they could do this once again against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are technically a top-tier quarterback and wide receiver matchup and tight end matchup, as the secondary has been torched by everyone as of late. So Greg Dortch, assuming, of course, we're going to get a high-scoring potential shootout here, should be relevant. Moving on to another 34, we have Jordan Addison. We're still all waiting for the cement to dry on the J.J. McCarthy situation. So until that takes place, technically speaking, Jordan Addison is a tough start. Therefore, we're going to have him here as our number 34 because, again, until J.J. McCarthy wakes up, Jordan Addison's overall opportunity share is not of the quality in which it needs to be at a top 36 ranking position every single outing. Josh Downs is at number 35. Prior to this most recent game against the Falcons overseas, in which he had an underwhelming performance, he was coming off of 3 consecutive games of scoring a touchdown within this offense. He had 19 targets in those 3 games, and every single one of those receiving touchdowns was scored inside the 10-yard line. As long as they are giving him opportunities in that capacity, and of course, this Kansas City defense is going to be focusing on trying to stop Jonathan Taylor, Alec Pierce, and of course, Michael Pittman, and Tyler Warren. Again, there's so many threats within this offense, it opens up even more opportunity for someone like Josh Downs against a blitz-heavy team, one-on-one man coverage. Expect for Daniel Jones to cook this secondary. The final wide receiver I wanted to mention is Parker Washington. In the event in which Brian Thomas Jr. is not going to have the free reign of not having to take on Will Johnson this week, I would assume that Parker Washington can be relevant against the Arizona Cardinals. Again, we're going to keep an eye on the practice reports. Again, his most recent games of target opportunity has diminished, but I still do believe that he is going to be very much so implicated because this most recent game was a run-heavy script for this offense, getting as many rushing attempts as they did out of Tootin and Etienne, winning 35-6. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my top 36 wide receiver rankings for Week 12 of the 2025 fantasy football season. Final reminder for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings every single Thursday and Sunday, you can check out the Patreon. Signing up today with the 2025 fantasy football champion tier not only gets you those rankings for both half and full PPR, all positions including flex, but you'll also be able to ask me any and all fantasy football questions. Just go ahead and click on the envelope in the top right corner, shoot me any messages you have, or of course access the exclusive Patreon only Discord community server, and also be able to send me some DMs on Discord in which you can show your team, share your overall screenshots of your roster so we can help you go in the right direction. Thank you everybody for watching. I'll be back later tonight live streaming on the channel. Until then, I'll see you guys. Peace.